when I was researching this, the first thing I came across was that the fact that you fell in love with music at a very young age. I think 9 is the one I saw on the internet. I don't know how accurate that is, but it says you fell in love with music at a young age, but you faced heavy resistance. Let's talk about that. What was going on there, and how did you actually overcome that?
Yeah, I think with me, music is an inborn thing. Because I remember even as early as 6 years, my heart would beat very fast every time I saw somebody holding a guitar. So I think it was instilled inside me from birth, child. Yeah. So around age 9 is the time when I made myself a homemade tin guitar. When my father discovered it, he was not happy. So I was beaten up a number of times because of that. But I remained steadfast because I knew this is what I wanted. So I'm happy that I pursued the career.
Yeah. There's a bunch of interesting things there. Like, how do you learn to make a guitar at 9? Maybe talk me through that if you do remember.
There were a lot of people who were making homemade tin guitars, so it was easy to just copy. We just take a gallon, then look for a plank. Because I remember the time our neighbor was a carpenter. So I don't remember if I went and borrowed the plank or I just helped myself, I don't remember. But I remember I took a gallon and put a plank, hammered some nails and drilled some holes, and then put some fishing lines.
Those are the strings.
But it had 2 strings only.
I mean, that's enough for someone who's aching to play anything. I'm sure that was enough. And so you start pursuing music, like you said. You remain steadfast. When do you then decide that you are going to be a musician? Was there an aha moment, or you stumbled into that?
When I was in grade 7, I think I was between 12 and 13 years old, I started discovering that I could compose music. So I started composing music. I still have my first songbook even right here. So when I noticed that I could compose music, that's when I decided, you know what, I want to be in the music industry full time. So that's when I started researching about the music industry, watching documentaries about musicians, reading books about musicians, and listening to interviews as well of local musicians. I wanted to get myself as much knowledge as possible before I went in full time. So by the time I went in full time, I was 17. I already had so much knowledge about the music industry, the Zimbabwe music industry and the international music industry. So my choices were well informed.
I hear you. That's fantastic. And so you said something that's interesting. You said you started researching, and for most people, most younger people who watch and listen to this, research to them means Google, YouTube. We have all these new tools. But for me, what's interesting is you guys didn't have any of that.
Yeah, there was.
So what does research mean in that context?
What I remember is I befriended a lot of old people who were also into music. So by befriending them, I would ask for books. Like I remember the first book that I read was a Bob Marley book, which chronicled his story from a young age, and then the second book was a Jimi Hendrix book, because Jimi Hendrix was my favorite guitarist and one of my biggest influences.
Yeah.
So after that, I sort of gained a skill of looking for those books. So I started looking for those books, looking for magazines. I had a huge collection of magazines where I would read a lot about the music industry. And then later on, when I was, I think, around 16, that's when I decided, you know what, I'm just reading a lot about foreign musicians, but I have zero knowledge about local musicians. Yeah. So I started looking for content on local musicians and listening to interviews by local musicians so that I know what's happening in Zimbabwe. So by the time I entered the music industry, when I was 17, I had full knowledge.
Yeah, that's great. And so you enter the music industry at 17.
Mm-hmm.
How does that happen? Did you have a big break? Did you start your own band? Were you independent? Were you signed to a label? Because I believe at that time there were labels were still a thing locally.
Yeah. What happened is As I grew older, I was now ashamed of playing a two-stringed homemade guitar. So I met somebody by chance named Lasti Saidi, and I remember it was on 25 January 1988 is the day he taught me my first lesson on a proper guitar.
Yeah.
That was 1988. So within a very short time, I improved myself, and then as soon as I improved, I now had something to give to those people that I wanted to borrow guitars from, because most of them couldn't play. So I could teach them for free, and then they would borrow me their guitars. So I think within 2, 3, 4 months, I was already playing very well. That's when I started my first band. It was called Sarungami Chanters. The picture is right there. I was 17.
Yeah.
So through my research, I heard a lot about what happens in Zimbabwe music bands. There were a lot of superstitions. People saying if you join a big band and if somebody is fired because of you, they can bewitch you, blah, blah, blah. So I just made up my mind that I don't want to join another band. I want to form my own band. So at first I thought I was a good singer. So because I was the one composing the music.
Yeah.
So with my first band, we practiced. Then the following year, 1989, we started going for auditions. Grammar Records was the biggest. In fact, it was the only record company in Zimbabwe that time. Because it also housed ZMC, which was its subsidiary. So it was just one company. Yeah. They would hold auditions every Monday. So we attended those auditions, and the producers told me, "You are not a good singer." I think that was one of my biggest heartbreaks in life. They told me, maybe you can be a back vocalist, but move away from the lead vocals. Yeah. So we looked for lead vocalists, and I carried on writing songs for the band, doing back vocals, and so forth. So that's how I entered the music industry professionally. That was 1988.
You said something that's interesting there. So you own the band essentially, or at least you started the band. But now you have to take a back seat and get a lead vocalist. Is my thinking correct in saying that usually the person who becomes the face or the lead vocalist essentially takes over a band? Was that one of the problems, or that was never really a thing?
Yeah, you are correct. That's a very good question, because that problem haunted me for a long time. Because every time we hired somebody to be the lead vocalist, every time there was always a coup. It happened a lot of times. So I suffered a number of coups because of that. But my idea was I didn't want to join somebody's band. Because through my research, I had noticed that in Zimbabwe, issues of payments, issues of remuneration were a very big problem. Because bands were known for being bad paymasters. So I didn't want to become an employee of somebody. I wanted to be
your own boss.
My own boss. So the idea was I wanted to copy a model that was used, or that is used by people like Carlos Santana. Carlos Santana is the lead of the band, and he writes some of the songs. He'll be playing guitar, but he'll be doing back vocals. Or groups like Sango Mota. Sango Mota, Frank Lipa was the main composer, but the lead vocalist was Tsepo Chola. So that's what I wanted to be. Even if I was not the lead vocalist, I wanted to be one of the owners of the band. Not to be somebody's guitarist. Because I noticed that a lot of we used to think now music is paying very well, because you notice Thomas Mafumo driving a nice car, you notice Olvam was driving a nice car, but no one thought of the guys behind the scenes. And most of those guys behind the scenes, they were not paid very well. So I wanted to avoid that. So for a long time, I tried to avoid joining other people's bands as a member. I wanted to be one of the owners of the band. So I tried that for a number of times until it failed. Then I changed the formula.
So you spoke about failure there, and one of the things I noticed when I was going through that portfolio you sent me is that you started many bands, and many of them failed. Apart from what you've already explained, were there other reasons for the failure of these bands?
First of all, the first band was Sarungami Chanters, and we wanted to record, so we attended auditions. I think we did more than 10 auditions and we failed all of them. And I do not blame anybody because we still new and we were not yet ripe for recording. The second band was called Chuck's Brothers. We also tried a lot of auditions and they failed again due to the same reasons. And we had members like Mayaka Singh, Jackson P and so on, but still we failed to record. Then with my third band, we tried a number of auditions, and then finally we were able to record 1992. The album was released 1993, but as soon as the album was released, before recording the album, we had made an agreement that the band was just going to be called the Crocodile Rockers Gang. It was in honor of the first guys who fought in the second liberation struggle, second Chimrenga. They were called the Crocodile Gang. So we called ourselves the Crocodile Rockers Gang. But when the album was released, the band leader went and changed the name of the band and he put his surname. And his surname was Chikoko. And as soon as the album was released, everything changed. He started dictating, and you could see that he had taken over the band. He was now the overall leader. All the agreements that we had made before the release of the album, they were all cancelled. So I just said, you know what, this is exactly what I was trying to run away from. So I'm not going to be a band member. So I quit. That's how I quit that band. I think it was my third band. So after the third band, I just worked as a session musician, working for different artists until 1994 when I converted to Christianity and joined the Asia Gospel Train. So in Asia Gospel Train, we did some recordings, but there were also some political issues, band politics. So I left the band again because they had a law where they said the band members were just supposed to play and the girls are supposed to sing. So band members, you can't record your own music or you can't do your own music because if you do your music, what will the girls do? So they wanted the girls to remain in front and the instrumentalists to remain behind, and I didn't want that. So I quit and I joined another one called Christian Life Center. It was a church. It's now called Faith in God. Everything there was okay. I was the band leader, but one big issue with churches is the payment issue, the remuneration issue. It was very little. So the pastors, every time you asked for more payment, Christians will always start giving you verses in the Bible.
You're serving.
You're serving the Lord, and you're living by faith. God is going to reward you, blah, blah, blah. So I didn't want to wait till I die for me to be rewarded. So that's how I quit. And then I joined another band again. It was a church called the Revival Center. The payment was good, but the treatment was terrible.
Wow.
Because the pastor wanted to be feared. Wanted everybody to. And I noticed that amongst the churches, that one is a very serious problem. Because what they call humility is being dumb and being tolerating anything.
Following instructions.
That's what they call humility. That's why they preach a lot about humility, because their version of humility is totally different from the dictionary definition. So I didn't want to live under such conditions. But the good thing is that every time I left a band where I was not satisfied, I will make sure that I explain everything so that they know, so that they don't have to guess why I left. So I always told them the truth, that I'm not happy with this. I'm not happy with the way you are treating us. I'm not happy with the way you treat us like small children. Because I remember one church that I worked for, the pastor would beat up the band members right in front of the church. So I was telling them, how can I be beaten when my wife is sitting there and my child is sitting there? And they will call it humility. If you accept or if you tolerated that humiliation, you'll be called humble. You'll be given as an example. You see, this man is very humble. You can even beat him up in front of the church and he doesn't care. So to me, I didn't want to bow to such stupid doctrines, so I left. So that's when, I think in 2000, that's when I just decided, you know what, I don't want to work under churches anymore. I'd worked for churches from 1994 to year 2000. So for 6 years, I worked full-time in churches. And I didn't like what I saw. I didn't like the hypocrisy, the treatment, the remuneration, and everything. So that's how I quit the churches, and that's how some of the groups failed. Answering your question.
Yeah. So there's something interesting there. You went from what is described as secular music to a very different type of music, essentially gospel and praise and worship and whatnot. Are there any differences between being in a secular band and being in a gospel band that stood out to you during these times?
In all my traveling, the first time I went to America, I was expecting to face a culture shock, but the biggest culture shock that I got was when I joined the gospel music fraternity. It was a serious culture shock because there was a lot of hypocrisy. I remember one band, the pastor was sleeping with all the 3 girls, and there was a wife beater who beat up his wife. So I was asking myself, you know what? I came from the secular world. I'm married. I treat my wife well, but I was called a sinner. And this guy is a preacher, and he's treating his wife like this. He would beat up his wife and sleep with all the girls in the team, but he was considered somebody holy and given a lot of respect. So it was a serious culture shock. I was really shocked. And when it comes to remuneration issues, it's far more worse in the gospel music circles. It's very serious because they use the Bible to justify their mismanagement. So when every bad behavior is justified by religion, it becomes worse. So the gospel music fraternity, I didn't enjoy it that much. I used to watch it from afar and I thought it was perfect, but when I got in, I discovered I would be better off playing in secular music bands. So when Oliver Mukundu approached me, I took it, and my life changed, and I was treated very well as compared to how I was treated in churches.
So before we touch on your experience with Oliver Mukundu, is there anything you learned from all these failures? Because you like you said, you started in 88. 2000 you were still going at it and hitting brick walls, be it church, secular, like you said, coups, just those crises of identity, seeing your faith being tested. How do you soldier on? Because for most people, 12 years, committing 12 years, which are largely not what you want to be, it feels like you weren't where you wanted to be. How did you go through that? What were the things you learned?
I learned a lot. With the journey that I went through, I've got 0 regrets, but I've got lessons. So if you interpret well what you went through, you don't regret, you learn. So I learned a lot. That's why I wrote a book which I released 2017 called Following the Melody. I was highlighting all my mistakes and all the struggles that I went through. I never sugarcoated anything. So I think there are a lot of lessons that I learned, especially with issues on band management and writing things down, writing contracts. Because most of the time we'll just get in with that face, and then after some time things will change and things will be twisted. They'll tell you, remember that day when you said this and that, and you don't even remember the day.
And you never said it.
You never said it. So the best, one of the biggest lessons that I learned is you need to write things down. Everything has to be written down clearly so that you don't have any distortions later on.
So let's get into that experience you mentioned prior with Oliver Mukundu, who is arguably one of our greatest local musicians. How did you get to work with Oliver Mukundu?
It was 2003. His guitarist at that time was Pilani Dube, and Pilani wasn't feeling well. So they could tell that it would be a problem if they took him on tour, because he had a huge American tour, huge European tour the same year. So they started looking for a guitarist who could play Zimbabwean traditional music, who could play a bit of jazz and a bit of some Western styles. Because if you listen to Oliver Mukundu's music, it sort of has elements of everything. It's largely Zimbabwean, but it has got elements of jazz, elements of some slight Western music. So the guitarists that they found, some of them would be playing Western styles very well, playing their jazz very well, but when you try to give them Zimbabwean music, they couldn't play. Some guitarists could play Zimbabwean music, but they couldn't cross over
play the Western.
So everybody was telling him, look for mono, look for mono. So he didn't know me. And a friend of mine, Blessing Parutsa, who is husband to Tujamo, took a video of me playing live and gave it to Debbie. He wanted us to form a jazz band and record in South Africa, since Debbie was connected to South Africans. He wanted Debbie to see the video and so that she can organize a deal in South Africa. So when Debbie saw the video, she said, you know what, this guitarist, we want him in our band. So she started making plans, but she didn't know my name that time. And then Tuku had met me teaching guitar at Prince Edward School. So Tuku was saying, if we don't find mono, we're going to look for that guy who was teaching guitar at Prince Edward School. Or we might look for the guy who was playing guitar on that video.
Me, myself, and I.
Three guys. So they were looking for 3 people, and all the 3 people was me. So 2003 February, that time I was now teaching guitar at the Zimbabwe College of Music. That's when David called me and invited me for a practice session. She just said, can you please come to our practice session? We have a rehearsal tomorrow. Please bring your guitar. So I didn't even know that it was an audition. So I went there, met some few familiar faces. So Tuku that time was rehearsing for the album Tio. So what he would do is he would just start playing a song and tell me to come in with my own lines. So as a session musician and somebody who had been working as a session guitarist for a long time, I was very good at catching how a song was going, and I was very good at creating melodies. So I was just coming, so Tuku was very happy with that. So after that, he never told me that I was now in the band. He just said, I really like the way you play, I really like the way you compose your guitar lines. So he just gave me a heap of his CDs, a huge catalog. I still have all the songs in my machine to turn them into MP3s. So he just gave me a huge catalog of his music, and he told me, in your spare time on this album, rehearse this song and this song, and rehearse this song and this song. Then for the following days, I would come for practice, and we just practicing for that single album. And that guy Pilano was still okay that particular time. So they were saying, I will practice for tours later. And then all of a sudden, Pilani fell ill, and I had to come and play live, and I never played the old material. So he just called me, I think an hour before the show, and he said, you have to come play the show. He said, but I never practiced the old material. We were just busy practicing the latest album. And he just said, just come. So the first gig I played without rehearsal, and he would whisper in my ear and say, do you know Ziwele, the guitar line for Ziwele? And I said, is it the one that goes babiri babiri? And he says, that's the one. Then I'll try it silently. And then I tell him I got it. Then I'll start it. So the show went on like that until the show was finished. So I thought after that, Tuku is going to say, okay, now let's go and practice the show repertoire. But he never did. He just told me, tomorrow we're going to South Africa. Then after South Africa, we're going to UK. After UK, we're going to the States. But we not practice anything. So I had to find my own time to rehearse the older songs. Because he had so much faith in me. Because I was very quick in catching up the melodies. So he just said, this guy, maybe just said this guy can play anything. So he never rehearsed with me. So it was up to me to start working on the old material. So that's how I joined the band. That was February 2003. And we traveled around the world. I learned a lot, and even the studio equipment that I have now, I bought it during the time of Oliver Mukundu. And Oliver Mukundu was a very good paymaster. I think 2 people that I worked with that were very good paymasters is Oliver Mukundu and Choniso Marai. So it was a huge experience in traveling around the world, I'm somebody who loves to learn. So every time we played with other musicians, I would be noticing what they're doing on stage and learning a lot from how they are moving the crowds and getting a lot of tips and even speaking to other musicians, speaking to everybody. So that period of time was a very good period for me. I think it's the best time that I was in the music industry.
Yeah.
But in February 2007, he hired a new manager. And the new manager fired all of us. So all 7 of us were fired February 2007.
Yeah, I read that and I found that interesting. What was the reason? Was the band underperforming? Was it I'm the new guy here, new go here, things go my way? What do you think happened there, or what do you know happened?
The band was, people used to call the band the A-Team, because I remember we would fill up HICC and people would be taken away when there was no space.
Yeah.
And so when the new manager came, I think he had new ideas. He wanted to hire guys who are still new in the music industry, so that they don't give them problems when it comes to payments. So they hired guys who were still very young, who were still very new in the music industry. Some played marimba, some played bira. But it seems like his audience did not like the drastic changes. And his audience in Zimbabwe started going down.
Yeah.
Yeah. But after some time, he reverted back to having a full band. Because that time when we were fired, he was now playing without a lead guitar, without keyboards. He was just using marimba and bira. But the people didn't like it. His audience did not like it. So he went back to
full band setup.
To full band setup. But with me, we remained very close. So he would even invite me for his bigger shows. Like every year he would celebrate his birthday. It was on 22 September. Yeah. And he would invite people like Yuma Sekela, Ringo, and so forth, Dorothy Masuka. And he would call me to come and play for those artists.
Yeah.
So every time I would go to his birthday celebrations and play for the likes of Yuma Sekela and so forth. So we remained very close until he passed away.
Yeah. I think that period you talked about, the early to late 2000s, I was very young, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it felt like that was peak Tugu, if I'm not mistaken. It felt he was huge.
Yeah, that time he was very huge. He was huge, and he would fill up. Like I said, he would fill up HICC and people would be turned away.
Yeah. And
every time he had a show, they'd call riot police to control the crowds. And in countries like South Africa, he would be received like a diplomat. Even in Zambia, I remember the other time we were received by a police escort in Zambia. Yeah. In Kenya, he was received models. They organized a proper welcome. Like he was treated like a dignitary.
Yeah.
So that was his peak for sure.
Yeah. So you worked with him during his peak. I'm sure you had researched him way before because he was still a big artist. What do you think set someone like Oliver Mtukudzi apart from his contemporaries in the industry?
Yeah, that's a very good question because that's where a lot of people are losing it. Oliver Mtukudzi's music was very Zimbabwean. And the world is not kind to copycats. The world music industry is very ruthless to copycats. You have to be original, you have to be authentic. And by authentic, I mean doing music which sounds like where you come from, singing about things that you lived. That's why in rap music they talk about, they call it being real. Because you can't sing about Hennessy which you have never drank.
True.
So Tuku's music was very original. He did not sound like anybody else. He sounded like himself, and his music was very Zimbabwean. So everywhere we went, sometimes we'd share the stage with very big artists from USA, from Europe, and you wouldn't feel ashamed to go on stage because you'll be doing your music. No one can correct you.
Yeah,
but I should have played like this. So his biggest weapon or his biggest selling point was he was original and he was authentic. He was doing Zimbabwean music. And a lot of youngsters, that's why they lose it. They think that if they copy Nigerians, Jamaicans, Americans or South Africans, that's their ticket to international stardom, but it doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
And if you look at Zimbabwean music history, Zimbabwean music history started in 1930. Up to now, there's not even a single artist who has made money by playing foreign music. But still, people place value on storytelling than evidence. So they keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, so that's why they lose it. Because right now I was speaking to another promoter. He was telling me that right now in Zimbabwe, the biggest crowd puller is now Macheso. Because Mutukudzi passed away.
Yeah.
And all the other youngsters, some of them had good crowds, but then they started copying Nigerians, they started copying South Africans, and their crowds are going down. And I don't know whether they are noticing it or not, but their value is going down.
Yeah.
They are now releasing music which does not last 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, the music is gone.
Yeah.
So it's really sad. But the good thing is, a number of them, I spoke to them and told them, you know what, guys, you are killing your brands by copying Nigerians. Stick to your music. And they bluntly refused. So I just said, well, let the music industry itself teach them. But the music industry is not a good teacher. It's a very ruthless teacher.
Yeah, that's very true. So, when you were talking about Mutukudzi, you talked also about Chiwoniso, and not much is documented on the internet when I was researching. Were there any big differences between working for her and working for Mutukudzi, and maybe what are some of your fond memories of those experiences?
I think there were more similarities than differences. Because Chiwoniso's music was very Zimbabwean, and working with her, she didn't want to appear like a boss who wanted to be feared, to just relax and joke together. And that's exactly what Oliver Mutukudzi used to do as well. So even when it comes to issues of paying band members, both of them were very good at paying band members. Although Chiwoniso went a step further, because with Chiwoniso you would agree on a certain amount, but after the tour she'll give you more than what you agreed on. So Chiwoniso I don't know what philosophy of life she lived on, but she was very different, very liberal, very loving. And some of the times I remember she was working with another group of artists. After she had paid everybody, she just took the bag with the money and threw it at the guys and said, share amongst yourselves. That's how she was. So she lived I think she had a very good philosophy that she followed. Because even at her house, she would help street kids, she would feed street kids, and you always find a place filled with a lot of people, some of them who are not even related to her, or who are not even her friends. She was just somebody who wanted to give. And the funny thing is that she was born in the States. She came to Zimbabwe, I think she was a teenager when she came to Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
But she was very much in touch with Zimbabwean culture. She was speaking Shona fluently. So I think the main contribution to her goodness is how she was raised. That's what I think. That's it's very surprising. Yeah. And she also, one thing about her, she was very secure. Most Zimbabwean artists are very insecure.
Yeah.
You are not even allowed to greet fans or talk to the promoters if you are on tour. But she also would ask her band members to perform their own songs on her show. That will never happen with Zimbabweans. Zimbabweans are very insecure. They are just afraid of coups. They will never allow you to. Even if you get a lot of support from the audience, it can get you in trouble. It can get you in trouble.
So what kind of a situation is that? Like maybe a guitarist who also dances and is performative.
So every time you join a band, you need to check the weather. The political weather. See what's allowed in this band, what's not allowed, which is too far and which is...
what's a safe place?
Yeah, the safest place. Because at times you'll be walking on eggshells. I remember one guitarist was beaten up by the band leader after a fan asked for his phone number.
Wow.
And he was beaten up. He passed away, but he passed away with a gap in his tooth. After he was beaten up by the band leader. just for giving his number to
a fan.
Yeah. So there's a lot that happens in the Zimbabwe music industry which people are afraid to talk about. But the good thing is I'm not afraid of it.
So I think the more knowledge.
Because I believe the truth can set you free and the half truths can bind you more. So you need to say it as it is. Zimbabwean artists are very insecure.
Do you think that's still a thing in today's music industry?
Mm-hmm. It's still there. That's why if you are my band member and you record your music, you're fired. Because it's like you're challenging my authority. And if you read the newspapers, there are a lot of band members who are fired for recording their own music.
There's a story I thought of, but it's besides the point. So, maybe just touching a bit on something that's a bit more personal. Because people view musicians and people in the entertainment industry generally in a very in a certain way. I think you understand what I mean. But you mentioned previously as we were talking that you saw a contrast between how a certain pastor was treating his wife and women in the church, contrasted with how you were treating your own wife, who you respect, and you've spoken about this in multiple interviews. And an interesting thing you've also mentioned before is you've always viewed marriage as a business decision. What does that mean, being an artist?
I think an artist has to be very careful when he's choosing somebody to marry, because who you marry will affect your career later. Because you need somebody who understands your career and who is not intimidated by fans. But of course, in the music industry, there's a lot of temptations, and a lot of that's why a lot of musicians passed away between 1985 to year 2000, especially from 1990 to year 2000. A lot of musicians passed away of AIDS, and that time there was no ARVs. So, back to the question, I think it's very important for a musician to marry somebody who understands his career. And I think it's even far much better to marry before you are famous. Because once you are famous, you attract a lot of fleas, you attract a lot of parasites. So I think the best would be for a musician to marry before they are famous, marry somebody who is humble enough and who supports their career. And I think that's my advice to musicians every time I speak to youngsters.
That's very interesting. And then coming back more to industry specific stuff, no, we actually skipped something that's a very cool story. And it's very foundational. The name Mono. So I kept coming back to it because of the picture I keep seeing.
Okay.
Where did the name come from? I know this should have been one of the first, but I mean.
I used to love dreadlocks a lot, so they were not allowed in school. So what I did is I grew a single dreadlock, which I used to call a monologue. So I would hide it in my afro. So after school, I would take it out. So people started calling me monologue until it was shortened to
Mono. And now it's Monolio Studios, and it's become the brand.
From that name.
Okay, that's fantastic. Going back to what I was actually about to ask you, is you saw a local music industry that could be monetized. At least you had labels like you mentioned earlier. And I think now, and correct me if I'm wrong, we see one that is almost impossible to monetize. At least it's very difficult to monetize for newer artists. Why is it so difficult now for local musicians to make money from their craft? The biggest issue, there are a number of issues that contribute. Number one, our economy is very much in tatters. Number two, our population is very small. Because if you look at countries where music brings in more money, countries like South Africa, Tanzania, Nigeria, DRC, they've got huge populations. Even in America, they've got 300 million people in one country.
So our population is very small. We're just 15 million. As a result, the money that we make in Zimbabwe is very little. And then number two, we used to have record labels. Record labels, they used to provide guidance, and they used to make the business side easier because they would do all the business side for the musicians.
Yeah.
But when digitalization came, they couldn't stand the heat, so the companies went out of business. And for musicians to be the artist and the marketing person at the same time, it's very difficult. As a result, things have gone out of hand.
Yeah.
In the last year, National Arts Council, they conducted a survey, and they were saying that 34% of Zimbabweans access their music via streaming, which is a very small number.
Yeah.
And they said it's only 3% of artists last year who managed to get anything around $500 in Zimbabwe. Combining all the artists, it's just 3% of artists who managed to get something like $500 for the whole year.
Yeah, which isn't much.
Yeah, $500. It's nothing. Then they were saying 23% they consume music via WhatsApp platforms where it's just shared for free.
Yeah.
And then they said it's only 6% who buy CDs. So you can tell that everything is charters. So that's why I always advise artists that want to enter the music industry that they must take music as a side hustle first until it can pay more than the main hustle. That's when you can quit your job. Don't be quick to quit your job because music doesn't pay that much in Zimbabwe. Yeah. And then even if it starts paying you, you must also invest and save. But artists have got a problem of status signaling. Yeah. Every artist who makes a small breakthrough, they want to buy Mercedes-Benz and live a very expensive life, and when they fall sick, they've got nothing else to fall back on. And even this COVID period that was bedeviling us, a lot of artists, they suffered a lot because none had saved money. Because right now, if you look at all the youngsters who have had hits the past few years, they all have Mercedes-Benzes, and they live a life where they want to show wealth that they do not have. Yeah. And that alone is a serious disaster. So back to the question, the reason why we fail to make money is because number one, our bad economy, number two, our small population, number three, lack of record labels. Yeah. Those are our three main problems.
Yeah. So you talked about status signaling, and you've actually got a book about this, Famous
Poor and Famous.
Poor and Famous.
Yeah.
So what pushed you to write that, and maybe just talk about the book a bit more so that maybe people can know where to find it and what's in the book?
Yeah, around 2015, a number of people were sending me questions on Facebook concerning the music industry. So I would reply publicly. Then within a short time, it became a very popular program. People were sending me questions even as far as Tanzania, South Africa, Botswana. They were saying, we're enjoying, please don't use too much Shona because we also want to learn. So I started writing them in English and posting them on Facebook. So it became very popular. Then somebody, a guy named Blessing Vava, he was the one who said, why don't you turn this into a book? So that's how I came to write the book. So most of the questions that were being asked had a lot to do with the welfare of artists. Yeah. People were asking, why is it our artists are poor? Why is it they don't make money? Blah, blah, blah. So that was one of the main topics that I covered in the book. That's why I decided to call the book Poor and Famous.
Yeah. Yeah. And where can people find it? Maybe upcoming artists or just people who are interested in knowledge?
They can buy it on Amazon or they can buy it straight from me. There are a few bookstores in town that sell the book. But
you can always give me the list and we'll just put it over
I don't remember the names of the bookshops, but people can simply contact me.
Yeah.
And on all my social media platforms, I just use the name Mukundu. They can just contact me, and then we'll see what we can do.
Okay, that's fantastic. Yeah. So another thing you're a big proponent of is singing in local languages? I mean, you've alluded to some of it in some of the previous questions we've talked about, but I mean, why is that the case? You're a big proponent of local languages.
Yeah, I believe music, language is an instrument. Because if you listen to like Latino music, when they sing in their languages, there's some very interesting rhythms that you feel. The moment they start singing in English, those elements are gone.
Yeah.
The same thing if you listen to DRC Rumba. When they sing in their languages, there's a certain feel that you hear. And when the moment they try to sing in Shona or English, it's gone. So I used to have that question myself, and I would ask myself, how does Oliver Mtukudzi, Thomas Mapfumo, Bund Boys go and perform in Europe where there are no Zimbabweans and sing in Shona? So the question was answered when I started touring with Oliver Mtukudzi. I discovered that his Shona songs were even more popular amongst foreigners. And I noticed that what's attracting or what the foreigners are enjoying is the rhythms that are found in the Shona language. Because every language has got certain rhythms, certain tonalities, and it shapes the way you sing, it shapes your melodies. Yeah. So most youngsters believe that for you to be international, you have to sing in English only, you have to do music that is played in European countries. But as I mentioned before, if you look at our music history, it's only those that did local music, only those that sang in Shona who made it international.
Yeah.
So my idea is language is an instrument on its own, because it shapes how you write your melodies, it shapes the rhythms in your music.
That's clear enough. And then as we get closer to the end, I just want to touch on a few interesting things that I picked up from some of your other interviews. One of which, and correct me if I'm wrong, this apparently made people quite angry at the time. You said the best instrumentalists you had seen were in Harare, and they were under 35. So apparently that made people angry, but that's besides the point. My question is that still the case? And if yes, what do you think it is that gives the younger people an edge?
Yeah, the younger people of today have got many advantages. Number one, they've got the internet, so they can research and research and research. There are a lot of lessons, lots of tutorials online. And number two, they've got parental support. Our generation, we did not have parental support. Imagine I got up to 17 was still playing a homemade guitar. Yeah. But these days, these youngsters, at any age, they have instruments. The parents, they support, they even take them for lessons and so forth. That alone makes them better, because they've got the resources, they've got the support. My son is also a guitarist, and I believe he's now far much better than me, because I taught him when he was young, and all these guitars were here. And also because of the internet, there's Wi-Fi here, he's always Googling online. And when I taught him, I stopped monitoring him for some time. The next time I heard him play, I was shocked. Where did he learn this?
Yeah.
And then I started attending his shows. I was shocked by what I saw. That's when I also started noticing a trend amongst the youngsters.
Yeah.
And I noticed that the youngsters are on fire. Now, I'm also a music producer. So I noticed that, for example, I was recording a session, and this artist came with his own wind instrumentalist, and the guy was struggling. He was an older guy, he was struggling to get the melodies. And then I told him to call Joseph Shinori, who's a very young saxophone player.
Yeah.
What we had failed to do in more than an hour, Joseph came and did it in less than 5 minutes. He was very fast, he was always practicing, and he was always trying everything. He plays Latin American music, he plays jazz, he plays everything.
Yeah.
So that alone, to me, it's something, it shows that we are growing as a nation.
Yeah.
Because I've been to other countries like Zambia. Right now in Zambia, they don't have youngsters who play instruments. Because everybody's trying to be American in Zambia. They are busy creating beats and using the computer to create beats. It's very rare to see a youngster playing instruments in Zambia. So to me, it's something that really interested me. We have so much talent amongst the youngsters. The other time I was recording an artist from Zambia, and she said, I want a full band. And I called in youngsters. And she was saying, you mean these guys can play? And I told her, wait until we start the session. And she was shocked. Yeah. And the other time, there's this artist from South Africa, Zaza. She came to perform in Zimbabwe. And they asked Zimpraise to bake it. So my son is part of Zimpraise.
Yeah.
And he's 22. And Joseph Chinori is on saxophone. He's in his 20s again. Naftal on bass is in his 20s. What's his name? Madiwali on drums is in his 20s. Archie on keyboard is in his 20s. Yeah. And the manager was saying, so you mean these youngsters are the ones who are going to bake us? Then they demanded a long practice session, thinking, we're going to be in trouble. So they stepped aside and the guys were setting up. When they were setting up, they started playing. They were shocked.
Yeah.
And they reduced their practice time. And after the show, she came and shook their hands with, I didn't know there's so much talent here in Zimbabwe. Yeah. So it's not only us Zimbabweans who are getting surprised. All our neighbors are getting shocked. We have so much talent in Zimbabwe amongst the youngsters. So to me, it's not like they're now better than me. Yeah. To me, it's something to celebrate on.
Everyone wins. Yeah. So another thing we had almost skipped over is your journey into production, because now you have a studio. Maybe two questions there. What informed that, and how did you actually get into setting it up and then it becoming a thing?
Okay, I'll start with question number 2.
Yeah.
What happened is I've been a session musician for a long time. I think right now I'm featured over 1,000 albums. So by getting into the studio very often, you start learning a lot. You start getting extra curriculum knowledge.
Yeah.
So I started getting hired by musicians to arrange their music, and I didn't know that it was part of music production. So the other time I was in the studio, 2001, I had visited my friend who was producing Elias Msako. And there was something happening with the band, and he was trying to solve the problem and he was failing to solve it. So when I came in, I told him, you know what, I think the guy who is playing the rhythm guitar is the problem. The way he's playing, blah, blah. Can you stop his guitar, mute his guitar? They stopped the guitar and the music went back to normal. So after that, they solved the problem. So the engineer, there was an engineer called Clancy Mbirimi, and Elias Msako was the producer. So Clancy is the one who said to Msako, why don't you make Mono the producer and you just become the executive producer? Because the executive producer is the one who funds. So that's how I came into music production. That was 2001. But after some time, I noticed that I was producing all these artists and my name was not credited on the album sleeves. So at first I complained, and then it was corrected just on one album. Then the second batch of albums were released and my name was not there. And I said, you know what, I quit. So I quit music production. So I just said to myself, when I come back into the music production, I want to own the equipment so that no one can steal my credit again. So when I joined the Oliver Mtukudzi, I noticed that his remuneration was very good. So I got a chance to, I noticed a chance to buy my own equipment. So every time we traveled with Oliver Mtukudzi to USA and so forth, I would bring something. So I started buying 2004 up to 2006. That's when the equipment was finally enough. And then back to question number 1. I think what informed my production was the experience as a session guitarist and as well as working with other music producers. There's one producer called Andrew Bed. He's the one who used to produce for Celebration Choir. And I'm one guitarist he would call every time he would record his music, because he used to like how punctual I was and everything. So he started noticing his production style, how he produced. He would first shape the music on his own, and then later on call session musicians and so forth. So I really liked the way he produced. So I would ask him questions. I would notice everything that he was doing. So I copied a lot from him. So when I started my own studio, I just started by applying what I learned from Andrew Bird, and then also applied stuff of my own. So that's how I created my own production style.
That's great. That's great. And then, so I've got 2 more questions. One more serious than the other. But you said PE produces the best instrumentalists in the country. What do they have here?
They've got a very serious music culture in Prince Edward. Because what they do is, if you are good in sports, they make sure that you get the best coaching. If you are good in music, they make sure that you get all the resources and all the coaching and all the encouragement. So as a result, they don't take music as something that's not important, something to do, an extracurricular activity. They take music as a core subject. So I think they were the first to have a proper band, a proper school band that could really play like adults. So as a result, standards were set long time ago. I think in the 90s, because PE always had a very tight band. So because of the setting of the standards, every year, if you go and watch Prince Edward band playing, you'll be shocked. These are kids and they're playing like this. And most of them will be playing in big bands whilst they're still at school. Because if you look at accomplished instrumentalists like Josh Make, my son Takakunda, Joseph Shinori, Naftali Chwandikwa, Blessing Chimanga, they all came through PE. So it's a culture at the school. There's a very strong music culture. And the youngsters will be competing against each other. So that competition, I think, it pushes them to excel.
So to close this off, you recently celebrated your 51st birthday. I hope I'm right when I say 51, and the internet didn't lead me. So congratulations on that. That's a big milestone. What's the biggest lesson you've learned in your half century of existence?
I think one can easily destroy their future by enjoying their youth in the wrong way. So most people will be thinking they're enjoying their youth when they're busy destroying their future. So I think one thing that made me to live up to this age is when we started the music industry, there are a lot of temptations. Women, they come. In the band that I played for, I was the youngest. So the temptations were many. And all my friends were into sleeping around. And at first I said, I don't want to get into this. But I was pressured by peer pressure. But the good thing is God found a very funny way to correct me. Because the first time I tried to, not try, the first time I slept with a woman, I got a serious STI, which lasted more than 2 weeks. So I said to myself, I won't do this again. But as soon as I got healed, I did it again with somebody different and got another STI, a stronger one. And then I just said, you know what, anybody who wants to laugh at me can laugh all they want. I'm going to abstain until I get married. So I abstained until I got married. That's how I survived, because my friends, the ones that I was playing with in that band, all of them, they are dead. All of them. And in fact, the majority of the friends, of the guys that I started music with, they are all dead. I had to look for new friends. They are all dead because of HIV/AIDS and promiscuity. Because it's very difficult to resist a woman, a beautiful woman advancing.
That's true.
So that's why musicians died a lot, especially during the 90s. Between 1995 and year 2000, a lot of musicians died. And it was all due to promiscuity. Because in the music industry, they are what we call groupies. It's women who just want to sleep with musicians for nothing. They don't want to be paid. They don't want anything. They just want to sleep with a musician. Then they feel good would have slept with so and so. And it's an international problem worldwide. So in Zimbabwe it's there as well. So I managed to avoid it after my STI encounters. That's how I managed to survive up to now.
No man, that's great to hear, and thankfully you weren't one of the casualties. But thanks for having us and sharing your story with us.
Thank you very much.